Thanks to Card Market for sponsoring this video.
So it's about 2.5 weeks until Paupergenesis, and I'm still not exactly sure what I'm going to play. The main 3 decks that I've taken to larger tournaments in the past has been Black Sack, White Weenie, and Jund Wildfire. White Weenie, I wasn't really impressed with my run of it at the TTD Win-A-Duel. Jund I did pretty well with at the SCG-Con 1K, getting top 8. I lost to Elves, but he was very lucky in those games. But I am also worried about Jund's ability to beat Mono Red Madness, as sometimes it can just be a little too slow. And then Black Sack just hasn't had a great position in the meta for a while. It's okay against Mono Red Madness, although definitely struggles a little bit. Decent against Elves, and has some very bad games against Grixis Affinity. So none of those top 3 decks I've really been loving the prospect of playing. And I was talking to my brother, who imparted me with some classic wisdom from pro players, which is you can try to target the top decks and play your off-meta brew that hopefully has a good advantage against them, or you can just join them and play one of the best decks. I'm not a Mono Red Madness player or an Elves player, but Grixis Affinity is actually a deck that I have a good amount of experience with and don't dislike that much. I generally like Jund a little bit better, but Grixis Affinity certainly seems to be in a better spot in the meta right now. So because of that advice, I've been kind of testing out Grixis Affinity a little bit on the channel and a little bit personally, trying to see if it's something that I'm comfortable with. But I also got a little bit of advice from my friend Peter, who's actually the Elves player who destroyed me in that SCG-Con 1K. And he said he was watching one of my videos where I was playing Dimir Fairies, and I just looked very comfortable with the deck. You could kind of tell when I'm comfortable with the deck and when I'm not, which I do think is very apparent. I'm a lot more confident, sit back and just play the game as opposed to struggling over every decision. And Fairies was already one I kind of wanted to consider. I do think it's got a pretty bad matchup against Grixis Affinity, which makes me not love it for the meta, but it's very good against Elves and pretty decent against Mono Red as well. So I have Pauper the next 2 days, 2 different events. So I think I'm going to take Grixis Affinity to one of them and Dimir Fairies to the other, and see how I'm feeling after that. As of right now, I think these are the 2 decks that I'm deciding between, so we'll see which one I end up actually taking.
Cool. Most of the time it's just like window shopping.
Yeah.
Oh, look.
So David is, we just got to our hotel a little bit ago after dinner. And David is looking on Facebook Marketplace for things he could pick up.
I can quit whatever I want.
You can quit whatever you want. I definitely meant to do some recording in the car, and that never happens. But maybe I'll record some driving on the way back, and I'll have already edited it in. And then people will be deceived and think we were going there, but we'll be going back.
Little did they know.
They were idiots. They thought we were going here. Crazy. Hi, I'm Mars from StrataGames, and today we are talking about Paupergenesis. This was the Pauper event to go to in North America this year, and very luckily for me, I was able to go to it, and it was just a phenomenal time. Paupergenesis was put on by CubeCon, DMV, and New York City Pauper League. There were many different events across the weekend, tons of different cubes to participate in, big and small events for Legacy and Pauper. It was absolutely a great time for anybody who wanted to cast Brainstorm. Huge thanks to Chris from New York City MTG and Jen the Judge, who are the 2 people most responsible for making this event happen. It would not have happened without them, and it is such a monumental feat to put on such a large tournament, being the first people to make a tournament of this size for this format. It was absolutely incredible, and I want to make sure they get the thanks that they deserve. I wanted to do something a little bit special with this video. I didn't want it to be just the same tournament report that I do for all of the smaller events that I go to, since this was such a large event. So I did a little bit of vlogging over the weekend, trying to give you updates in the middle and end of tournaments, so I could offer you some impeccable wisdom that would live with you until your dying days. Things like, and I also even said this. I mean, I just, wow. So maybe a few issues, this being my first time trying anything out like this. I didn't lose audio for everything, so I'll still have a couple things interspersed throughout, but not as much as I had actually wanted. So me and my friend David left Cincinnati and drove 8 hours to get to Baltimore on Friday evening, grabbed some dinner, chilled in the hotel until the next day at 10 a.m. when we went to the Pauper 1K. Also, before we fully get into it, I should probably show you my actual deck list. I tried to be a fancy content creator and take a nice picture
showing off every single card. And let me go over a couple of the decision points that I made for this deck list. I had a lot of people ask me if I was on Barf's Dimir control list or more of a tempo build. The answer is certainly the control variant, very similar to Barf's list, but I certainly have some changes in here that fit my playstyle a little bit better, / are maybe relics of the past that I haven't gotten over yet. His control lists recently have skewed a lot more towards ninjas and different ninjas, like including a Moon Circuit Hacker and Mukutai Ambusher over the Gurmag Angler and the Murmuring Mystics that I'm pretty used to. I was running 2 Mystics before and decided that I could cut one of them, but I just think you need it sometimes in matchups, or at least I'm comfortable with it in some matchups, so I kept it. And I still do like Gurmag Angler quite a bit. Both of these came up in a few matches and were quite relevant, which we will get to. So as far as ninjas, I'm only on 3, and it's just Ninja the Deep Hours. I will admit I haven't actually tried Moon Circuit Hacker as like a one of in here. I probably should going forward. I have tried Mukutai Ambusher and I am not a fan. You can say I'm wrong, and I might be, but in my experience, the decks that you want to bring it in against are the burn decks, because that's where the lifelink is most relevant. And those are also the decks that have 12 or more different removal spells that all kill Ambusher, giving you no additional value except for picking up your creature, and so it doesn't really seem like it fulfills the job that it's supposed to do, in my opinion. That's why I don't have one in the main deck, and I don't have one in the sideboard. I am on Agni Warp in the main deck. For a while, this was an Extract Confession, which I now only have one of in the sideboard. The reason I want one of these is I do want to be able to kill a Guardian of the Guild Pact, and the reason I have the second is I really want to kill a Guardian of the Guild Pact. But with Red Rally, I figured Agony Warp might make a little bit more sense in the main deck. I already have tons of removal for big creatures. I only have a little bit of removal for go-wide decks, so I figured the Agony Warp could help me hedge against those. Obviously, instant speed is nice as well. I did go up to 2 Dispel over the second Murmuring Mystic here. Every time I go up against a creature combo deck like Walls, Spy, or Elves, I regret having the Dispel in there because Dispel is useless against them because they only play sorceries. But every other match, I was very happy to have Dispel. I think overall I would have preferred to keep these than the second Mystic. I've also had some people ask me about why only 3 Fairy Seers. I think this is just a little bit of people having a goldfish memory, which is totally fair. And by people, I mean maybe those people who asked that didn't know this, but 3 Fairy Seer in the Dimir control list has been super common for, as far as I know, years, because I've had this deck together for a few years. And only recently have people started playing the 4th one. Of course, it makes your spell stutter better. It makes it easier to ninja, which I think is why people have started playing the 4th one, is because they're playing a few more ninjas. But we are a control deck, not a tempo deck, so we don't necessarily need the Seer as much. So I'm still playing a couple Preordains, which I know a lot of people are off of at this point. Could the Preordains have been something else? For sure. Did I feel like they were ever bad? Not really. I mean, it's Preordain. It replaces itself for very cheap, helps set up your draws, can even trigger Mystic, so I didn't think they were bad, but maybe I could try replacing them, swapping them for some other cards. I also still play a Dimir Aqueduct, which is just free value as long as you're willing to have the tap land, and even can sometimes pick up your Brajuka Bog, which does a lot of work in some matchups. I think this is pretty standard. Sideboard, 3 Annul, 5 Blasts, Relic, 2 Relics that is, a Campfire. That was a last minute addition people were suggesting, and I thought was probably a good idea for the red matchups. Kiba Gang Shinobi, I think, is the control breaker. I think you already have an okay matchup against a lot of the control decks, but getting an Okiba Gang Shinobi down if they cannot remove it almost always wins you the game against any control deck, because who can sustain losing 2 extra cards every single turn? If you have any other questions about my deck list, please feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I will try to get to them. There were 60 people who signed up for the Pauper 1K, so it was 6 rounds of Swiss cut to a top 8. I decided to be a bit of a tryhard and take Dimir Fairies, just as I was going to in the main event, to get just a little bit more last-minute practice with the deck.
So here we are at Paupergenesis. We are in round 2 of the 1K, not the main event yet. I got to buy, so plenty of time. This is a very flattering angle. Plenty of time to walk around, see the sights, and do whatever else we want to do. And yeah, I got crushed by Monstertron round 1. We got a couple Monarchs down. Monarch gave me game 1 really easily. In game 2 it was Gunna. And they got Whisper So Cloak, which is a very good card apparently against us. Because if we don't counter it, then all their guys can gain Shroud, which makes it really hard to kill their guys if we don't have Snuff Out immediately available. And then also we can't block them, which means we can't hold on to Monarch. And also if you've used 2 Snuff Outs already, you die in 2 hits to Altasaur. So that's pretty brutal. David is over there somewhere playing his second match. But we already won, so don't need to worry about that. And this feels very unnatural because I'm not really used to vlogging or anything, and there are a bunch of people standing around, but also who really cares, you know what I mean? So we'll try to keep you updated. Just got back to the hotel room for the night. Ended up going 3-3 in the 1K today, which is, it's okay. Not great, especially since one of those wins was a bye. But that's okay. I didn't play perfectly.
And I probably got some hands that I probably shouldn't have with mulligans and stuff like that. So I think if I try to have some tighter mulligan play and just general play tomorrow, hopefully I don't get too bad variants and might be able to do some work.
Welcome everybody to the inaugural Paupergenesis. Today we have 256 players.
There I am, Gary, there I am.
Making this the largest North American Pauper tournament by about 120 players.
Before we get into my exact matches for Paupergenesis, let's take a look at the meta as a whole. All of this data was taken from Melee and put into the spreadsheet I'm about to show you by my friend Phil, someone you know, PK, who went above and beyond as I asked him to add more and more things to the sheet. He's a wizard with the numbers, and I don't know what I'm doing there, so I very much appreciate it. Thanks again, Phil. Also, you can access this sheet right now. There's a link in the description, so feel free to take a look and do whatever you want with the data. Being able to compile data for a format that is so competitive yet so small is so important, and so I really appreciate anyone who's able to help make that happen. We want to make sure to share this data with everyone because it's just such great stuff to know. So to no one's surprise, we have Mono Red Madness as the #1 deck with just over 10% of the metagame, the only deck with 10% of the meta. Remember, there were 247 players, 26 players showed up with Mono Red Madness, which is a huge jump above the next two decks, Grixis Affinity and Mono Blue Terror at 18 or 7% of the metagame. Those three decks taking up a quarter of the pie. Not bad at all. Then following that, we had 16 Elves players, 13 Dimir Fairies pilots. I don't think I even mentioned this, but another reason I was going to take Dimir Fae was because it was just a little bit better in the meta. It had been doing well in challenges and things like that. Clearly, I was not the only one who saw that, it being the 5th, or rather tied for the 5th most prevalent deck at the tournament, along with Mono Red Rally and Rakdos Madness. Then we drop below 10 players per deck, only 3.5% on Jund Wildfire and Spy combo, 8 Jeskai Ephemerate pilots, 7 Dimir Terror and White Weenie pilots, 6 Azorius Familiars and Monstertron, 5 Gardens, 4 Azorius Coggates, 4 Tribe, Panza, Naya Gates, and Teamer Pizza combo. All the way down here at 1.2%, we have Borosynth, Food Pestilence, Mono Black Sacrifice, Live in the Dream, and Ruby Storm. And then we have the 2s, Ultratron Black Eternal Fog. Phil refuses to call it Turbo Fog because there's nothing turbo about it. 2 Bogles, Flickertron, Gruul Ramp, Is It Scred, Mono Blue Fairies, and Walls combo. And beyond that, we had several one-of decks. Running through them real quick. Blue Fog, Boros Eidolons, this would be without Tribe, I assume. Dimir Affinity, Dimir Serpentine Curve, 4-color Tron, Grixis Madness, Gruul Tokens, Jeskai Synth, Jund Pestilence, Jund Reanimator, Mardu Blade, Madness, Synthesizer, Mono Black Devotion and Pestilence, Mono Blue Petitioners, a Mono Green Infect player, Mono Red Axes, Mono White Hair Apparent. I had multiple of my friends go up against this deck and lose to it, which was really cool to see. A whole bunch of Hair Apparents, some Charges, Prismatic Strands, and even some Mana Tithes in that list. Very, very spicy. Orzhov Blade, Poison Storm, Selesnya Gates, Slivers, Simic Mimic, I'm not even sure what that is, and Sultai Petitioners, with one, I believe, who dropped before even being there. So that is the full meta breakdown. We also have all of these archetypes sorted by win percentage. So the one Gruul Tokens player actually had a 67% win rate. Same with the Mardu Synth player. Flickertron and Ruby Storm had very good win rates considering how few players there were there. Selesnya Gates, Boros Synth doing well. Azorius Familiars, Boros Tribe, Jund Pestilence. Of the very prevalent decks, we have Spy combo with a 54% and Elves as well. Jeskai Ephemerate on 53. And my boy Mono Black Sacrifice, only 3 pilots, but 54% win rate is very strong. Not a bad showing at all from any of them. Mono Blue Terror just above 50%. We have Jund Wildfire representing the 50% exactly. Everything else was below 50%. Grixis Affinity, Mono Red Rally, Dimir Fairies at 46, not great. Madness at 43, Rakdos Madness at 40. Monstertron having a bad time, 36% out of 47 matches.
Pretty rough to see. We also have a color-coded heat map here just to show how good certain decks did against other decks. Grixis Affinity had a 53% win rate against Mono Red Madness in 26 games. That's a good number of games. Very strong. Mono Blue Terror won 80% of their matches against Madness. That's 16 out of 20. Very, very strong. Let's look at Dimir Fey, since that's where we're at. Bad against Grixis Affinity. Yes, indeed. Even against Mono Red Madness. 6 out of 8 matches won against Terror. Only 42% against Elves. That's interesting to me. Rally favored. Of course, these are very small sample sizes, 6 and 8 games and things like that, but still interesting to know. Rakdos Madness lost both games against Wildfire, won both against Spy Combo. There's a huge block here of almost all 100% against Rakdos Madness. Probably contributed to it doing poorly throughout the tournament. I'm not going to go through all of this, but it's a ton more great data if you want to look at that. All right, getting into the actual games for the main event at Paupergenesis. I started out round 1 against Mono Red Madness. All the lists I'm going to show from now on are the exact lists that I played against. I pulled these from mtgdecks.com. I don't think this matchup is particularly terrible for us. There are some bad things about it. They have a good amount of removal for our fairies and ninjas. Snuff Out costs us life, and we have a generally pretty slow game plan, so that might give them a little bit of extra time to try to get a little bit of reach and deal a little bit of extra damage in the late game. But I think our counter spells, the fact that we can almost always remove a pinger right away, and the card advantage we get makes it so it's not too difficult in general. So as always, in the thick of it, I don't ever write down notes, don't remember exactly everything that happened. I'll do my best to recount the matches. We had pretty much good games all day, which was really great. So game 1, they started with a Valdaran Epicure, pretty immediately telling me that they were on Mono Red or Rakdos Madness or maybe Red Rally. I was expecting it to be Mono Red Madness because that's the most prevalent deck, and obviously it ended up being that. I do believe I won the die roll, which was great because it allowed me to play an Augur Bolas on turn 2 and make it so that this Epicure almost never got to attack because I had a creature right away. Now, they could have killed it with a bolt or something, but instead they chose to go for a draw 2. I believe they might have gotten a snacker out immediately with a grab the prize. We took some damage, but our Augur was holding the ground down, and we did have some Spell Stutter Sprites and Fairy Seers, so I could start trying to counter 2-drops as well as block the snacker. Our goal is really just to stave off damage for the first 5 or 6 turns, to the point where we have mana to counter multiple things, and then the game gets a lot easier. Luckily for us, they didn't see a lot of Lava Darts early, otherwise they could pick off our fairies pretty easily. Once we left up mana, they started plotting highway robberies. In fact, I believe they plotted 2 in the same turn with 4 mana up. I didn't have any counter spells, but I did have a Snuff Out in hand. I expected there to probably be a pinger, seeing as they just plotted a couple of robberies. And I was still at like 15, 17 life. So I wasn't in the danger zone yet. I think I tapped out for like another Augur Bolas and maybe some cantrips or something. Again, we didn't have any counter spells. It made sense to try to find some more. They did cast a Gutter Snipe and immediately cast a Highway Robbery. I remember now, I believe I was at 17 life because I paid 4 life to snuff out the Gutter Snipe in response to their Highway Robbery. So I went from 17 to 13. They had 1 mana up, so they cast a Bolt, dealing me 5 damage down to 8. And then I still took 2 from the Highway Robbery down to 6. Pretty costly, but we did end up killing the Gutter Snipe and did not die that turn. We were at a low life total, but I was able to untap, not dead. And luckily, I think I had acquired like a Spell Stutter and a counter spell at this point. I was able to slam a Gurmag Angler, first game of the entire day, for just 1 mana. And then between that, a Ninja and an Augur, I think I had gotten a Ninja down a little bit earlier. I was able to attack in. They jumped with the Epicure. But after 2 more turns, because the Gurmag was able to do some serious damage, I was able to kill them. I think I had chipped in for 3 damage, so they were at 17 when they chumped the Gurmag. But then Gurmag, Ninja, and Augur, I was able to get in for 8 damage. I played 1 more Augur, holding up 2 counter spells, had 9 damage on board, and was able to take that game really quickly. So Gurmag really thrives in those environments where you've taken control of the game and you now just want it to end as quickly as possible, because I had a couple counter spells, but I didn't have endless. If they just kept ripping the right cards, we absolutely could have lost that game. If it took a couple more turns, the Gurmag really helps that not happen. Obviously for sideboard, we brought in 5 blasts, a campfire, and both relics of Progenitus. Pretty big sideboard here, but we also have a lot of things to take out. Snuff Out is no good. It's too expensive in forms of life. We took out the Suffocating Fumes, both Thorns of the Black Rose, and Murmuring Mystic. Gurmag is great because it can close the game quickly, like we just talked about. Mystic closes the game slowly and gets Pyroblasted, so not really something I want. Obviously, I don't want to be giving them the Monarch. And we replace all this mediocre and bad removal with much better removal. The good news for us is that I think our opponent wasn't super familiar with our deck list. They saw a Gurmag Angler, and so they actually brought in Relic of Progenitus, even though that's the only card in my entire deck. Well, I have 2 with the extract in the sideboard that really cares about the graveyard. I ended up playing a Relic of Progenitus on turn 1 or 2, starting to eat their graveyard, which was really nice. And then they proceeded to cast 2 relics against us, eating our graveyard, which actually was relevant. I did draw Gurmag at one point and could not cast it, but they had also had 2 cards sitting on the field that could have been drawing them more cards or finding more burn spells, being pingers, and they just left them on the field for 4-ish turns before they finally started cashing them in. So that actually slowed down their game plan. It was pretty nice for us. Even through our relic, I believe I had to tap out at one point I chose to, but like to play an Augur and maybe a tap land or something. So they did get to go for a grab the prize sneaky snacker. Oh, actually, I think what happened was that I had a mana up, and they did grab the prize, discarding the snacker. I went for a blue elemental blast, countered it, but then they had a highway robbery that they cast as well. I no longer had mana up for the relic, and it was already tapped. So they were able to get the snacker back from the yard through the relic. It wasn't a big deal. I ended up just casting a Spell Stutter Sprite to chump block, or rather trade with the snacker, just a turn later. We were not losing that much life. Again, the relic's on their board, and I think they might have taken a mulligan, made it so that we were not under a lot of pressure very quickly. They did have an Epicure still attacking in, but it wasn't doing too much. Then they cast a Faithless Looting, discarding another snacker and maybe a mountain or something, triggering their first snacker. Obviously, I popped the relic to take away 2 snackers and a Faithless Looting. I did get an Augur Bolas down, and they had just an Epicure. I also had a Fairy Seer. They swung with the 1/1, so I knew that there was something up, but I couldn't exactly place what they were going to do with the Epicure, and I didn't really care about my Augur that much, so I blocked. They cast Sazakep's Brew, which is a discard and draw 2, but if you gift your opponent a 1/1, your creature gets +2/+0. So they grew their Epicure by giving me a fish, which basically just shrunk. They traded their Epicure just to shrink my Augur from a 1/3 into a 1/1 fish, which wasn't the most efficient for them by any means. I did try to dispel the Brew because I had a dispel available, but that was my only card left in hand, and they did have a red blast for me, so they were able to get the draw 2 off. But they didn't draw much there, and I think I got like a Spell Stutter or something in hand, and I proceeded to attack them with a Fairy Seer and a fish for 3 turns, I think. The fish dealt quite a bit of damage, that's for sure. At one point, they got another snacker in their yard, and I Bajuka bogged them. I think they might have missed a sneaky snacker trigger, bringing it back from the yard, to be honest. I missed it too because I was getting at one point lowish on life, and I was just trying to figure out how to not die. So that was a little unfortunate for them. I think I stabilized at 3 life, so it could have been close, but to be honest, if I recall, based on the cards I had in hand, I don't think them having a snacker would have changed anything, but it certainly would have made things a lot closer. In any case, I took the match 2-0 and was moving on to round 2. Round 2, where we wound up against Gruul Panza. We sat down, had a friendly conversation, and they mulliganed to 6, and then they mulliganed to 5, and then they mulliganed to 4. So that game was not great for them. I think they ramped into a Repurposer on turn 2, and maybe a Chrysalis after that, but I already had a Fairy Seer, and then a Ninja, and then enough creatures, and kill spells to be taking out their guys and attacking in for some more damage. I think we landed a Monarch, drawing 2 cards a turn. Even when they found an Avenging Hunter, they basically just gifted us the initiative, and I was able to snuff it out. That game didn't last very long. Game 2 was a little bit more interesting. They were on the play. Luckily, we didn't get land destroyed on turn 2, but we did on turn 3. I should probably say that for sideboard, I did bring in Extract a Confession, and I brought in an Arms of Hadar over the 2 Dispels. Usually they don't play any instants, or maybe just a couple. They do actually have a couple bolts here, but I didn't see them, so I had no way of knowing that. And Arms of Hadar is not great against them, but they did get a lot of spawn and usually will. And maybe I'm able to get them to block with, their, Generous Scent on our Gurmag Angler, and then I can kill it with a Arms of Hadar, something like that. It was better than the Dispel in my mind. So then we got a Contaminated Aquifer on the field, and they blew it up with a Mon Volley Acid Moss. They didn't have many creatures on the board, so luckily they weren't getting any pressure in. I think they maybe had cast a Repurposer, and I snuffed it out. But I proceeded to play another Contaminated Aquifer, which they immediately blew up. I was not seeing any counter spells except for Spell Stutters, which I had no way to get countering a 4-drop. Each time I played an Aquifer, if I could, I snuffed out one of their creatures that was relevant, but with them coming in tapped, I was not even being able to use cast downs. They did play an Avenging Hunter, so I was able to take the initiative with my Fairy Seer, tutoring up my swamp, and then casting down the Hunter, which was really good for us. Unfortunately, they already had another Hunter, I believe, that was now a 7/6 because of the counters. I also got counters from the initiative on my Ninja trying to dodge a breath weapon, so I had a 4/4 Ninja and a 1/3 Augur Bolas to block. Unfortunately, that was 7 toughness to block all of the damage, but only 5 power, so I couldn't block and kill the Hunter. And they had 2 creatures. I didn't have kill spells for both of them, so I felt like I had to block with the Augur Bolas to absorb some damage, so I took 4 trample plus a trap. I think I went down to 5. I was trying to stay above snuff out range so that I could actually use one of those. Can't remember if I did that correctly or not. And then they cast another acid moss, blowing up my swamp. They blew up 4 swamps, which was really what killed us. We were able to hit a lot of our land drops and our black sources with Lorien Revealed, but eventually we ran out of them, and I died with like another snuff out and cast down in hand because I simply couldn't cast them. So that was a bit unfortunate. We lost game 2. Game 3, they did mulligan another 2 times, so definitely some rough luck. But we also were a little more prepared for all of the Panza. I played an Aquifer early, and then often I will cycle a Lorien Revealed for just islands after I have the first black source, because why would I need another black source? You often don't. And untapped lands are really good. But in this one, I obviously was not doing that. I was going straight to my third black source, so that there was no way they could take us off of it. They did still try blowing up one of them. We had seen a structural distortion in game 2, actually, so I swapped the Arms of Adar for a Hydroblast, just because they were showing me they had more red spells. I expected 4 boarding parties, although there's clearly only 3 here. Structural distortion, and I figured they might have some breath weapons. Not usually that worried about breath weapon because it kind of just slows us down, but we're still happy to go to the late game, so it doesn't really do anything but delay the inevitable. But game 3, they did get some ramp, but I was also able to spell stutter 1 or 2 of their sprawls. Luckily for them, they never started with an Arbor Elf start because I was prepared for that and had a snuff out available pretty much every game and was waiting for the Arbor Elf, and then it didn't come. But I think they once again played a couple repurposers, Chrysalis, and I just had the kill spells. Some ninjas getting in, they chumped with spawn for a while, but I actually drew some counter spells this time, was able to keep our lands alive as needed, let the ones go that didn't need to be there, and make sure the initiative didn't hit. So overall, a bit unlucky for our opponent in the mulligans, but also I think a bit unlucky for us with them getting so many land destruction spells and us not seeing a counter spell. In the end, we took the match, and we are now 2-0. Going on to round 3. Round 3, our opponent starts with a forest and a land grant, immediately telling us that they are spy. I've heard from some people that maybe this is not the best matchup for fairies. I find it to be a relatively easy one, assuming you're drawing well and playing correctly, because you have a lot of removal for their creatures, including free ones with the snuff outs. You have counter spells. Obviously, you can't counter like Generous Ent, Troll of Khazad-dûm being cycled, but you can spell stutter a Roostseek, which can be really effective. And while they can block your ninjas, first of all, maybe you can kill them to get through, but also if you just get Monarch down, that's going to pretty much win you the game slowly anyway. They do jam a Mesmeric Fiend immediately on turn 2. I have no recourse there, so I just have to show them exactly what we're on. Can't remember my exact hand, but they definitely snag a counterspell, and I believe I have an Agony Warp to kill the Mesmeric Fiend whenever I want to get the counterspell back, as well as probably a Lorien, Ninja, Mystic maybe. I don't remember exactly. But the Fiend sticks around for a little while until I find it necessary to kill it. I get a Fairy Seer down and start chipping in for some damage, also making it so that my Spell Stutter can counter some 2-drops. I try to focus on countering the Overgrown Battlements, as opposed to like Wall of Roots or Caretakers or anything, but also obviously trying to focus on countering Winding Way and Lead the Stampede. Unfortunately, they had just seen my hand, took the counterspell. They had land granted and shown me they had to Lead the Stampede, but obviously I didn't top deck another counterspell, and I couldn't yet Agony Warp the Mesmeric Fiend and then hold up a counterspell for the Lead the Stampede, so they were able to jam it right away with no fear. They turned up 3 creatures, which is above the middle amount they could get, but I realized they turn up Troll, Ent, and Sagu Wildling, 3 land fetchers when they already had 3 lands on the field, and I believe they'd already shown me at least 1 other Ent, and they had no creatures giving them additional mana right here. Only 4 lands in the deck means they're not going to be able to cast them at all. So I realize all I have to do is just keep them off any creatures that make mana, and their entire hand is dead. They also don't have enough creatures to cast Spy and actually go for a win, even if they have all 4 of their lands out on the field already. So once I realize that, I dedicate my kill spells, my counter spells to getting Overgrown Battlements, Walls of Roots, even Caretakers. I'm pretty quickly able to overtake them, getting some ninjas down and things like that. Pretty sure we counter a Winding Way or something like that in there, but they basically never are able to land any of their 5 or higher drops. We take game 1 pretty easily. So here we have 2 easy cards that we want to cut, which is both Dispels. Like I said earlier, they only play sorceries, except for stuff in the side like Flaring Pain, which is irrelevant to us. So we want to cut those immediately. We have 2 relics to bring in, which helps a little bit. And I cut the Suffocating Fumes for an Arms of Adar. Neither of these are amazing in the match because usually their creatures have such high toughness, but 2 rather than 1 can kill Gatecreeper Vine, and it makes it a lot easier to kill the 3 and 4 toughness creatures if they've just blocked an Augur or a Ninja, which could give us some ways to kill their creatures with Arms of Adar. Game 2, we start with a Relic of Progenitus in our opening hand, but The important thing is you don't just want to run it out immediately in this matchup because they're going to be running masked vandals. If they're smart, they're going to keep some in post sideboard because they're going to anticipate you bringing in some relics. And that's exactly what they did. They ended up, of course, land granting, which showed us their hand. So I knew there was a masked vandal, which made it very easy to play around. I landed a Fairy Seer early, and then eventually on turn 3 or 4, I played the Relic of Progenitus with the Spell Stutter sprite up. They cast the Vandal, and I indeed just spell stuttered it. No problem. Relic also is good to have early for a different reason, but again, you need to protect it, which is that if you can slowly eat their graveyard and there's never any creature in there, it actually makes it a lot harder for them to masked Vandal and exile it in the first place. So it's a tough balance, but if you have a counterspell to try to get rid of the Vandal in the first place, it's pretty good. And obviously, it's definitely worth spending even a full counterspell on a Vandal, because if you have the Relic on the field and they have no way to kill it, they cannot combo kill you. There is just simply no way they can win as long as you leave up 1 mana. You must leave up a mana if you have a Relic of Progenitus and your opponent's on Spy, no matter what. It is non-negotiable. So of course they have to play slower, try to find a way to get rid of the Relic, or just go for a mid-range plan of trying to slam Generous Sense and things, but that's pretty tough because I'm still trying to kill their battlements and whatnot. I think they do slip a Lead the Stampede through where I'm not able to counterspell it, which gives them like 2 Overgrown Battlements, a Wall of Roots, a Generous Sense, so they eventually end up with all the mana and I can't do anything about it. So I stop killing their creatures and I start just focusing on killing like Generous Sense and things like that as opposed to the mana producers. We get into quite the board stall. At one point they have 3, maybe all 4 Overgrown Battlements on the field, a couple Wall of Roots, 2 Mesmeric Fiends, one of which took a counterspell and one of which took a Suffocating Fumes, which means I left the Fumes in. Sorry, it's just so hard to remember everything. Oh, you know what? I think I took out a couple Augurs of Bolas because they have so many blockers that I figured that didn't make any sense. So I think I actually put in the Extract and an Arms of Vidar for 2 Augurs, and I kept the Fumes in. Anyway, the Fumes would have actually been really good because it could sweep away 2 Mesmeric Fiends, but they took it with the second Fiend. I actually thought for a little while when they cast the second Fiend that I could Fumes in response to the trigger, killing both of the Fiends, giving me my counterspell back, but then they would be able to permanently exile a card from my hand, which would be that counterspell probably, and that didn't seem very good, so I ended up letting it go. Anyway, the board stall was enormous. They started casting Spies to block our flyers because I had gotten a Ninja in with a Fairy Seer. They cast a Spy and targeted me. I think they milled me for like 9 or 10 cards the first time, and then they cast a second Spy and they targeted me, and I think it milled again like 8 cards or something. My deck was getting very thin. I think it was at 15-ish cards at that time, and I legitimately thought that we might get milled out. I think I also had the Monarch at this point, so I was drawing 2 cards a turn, which made things pretty helpful for us, unless of course we were going to mill out. But I eventually got my Murmuring Mystic, and this is where things changed. Suddenly, I had like 12 mana or whatever. I started hard casting Snuff Outs to kill their Overgrown Battlements because I was making a bird, so I was reducing their blockers by 1 and increasing my attackers by 1. I think I chipped in for a fair amount of damage, so they were at like, 12 life or something. But they had 10 creatures and I needed to just get through them. So I started snuffing out, casting down battlements, spies, things like that. Working my way through them, I eventually amassed like 8 birds. I definitely Agony Warped the Mesmeric Fiend at one point to get the Suffocating Fumes back, which then I used to kill the other Mesmeric Fiend, as well as I think a Wall of Roots that had 2 counters and blocked a 2 power guy, like a ninja, and then died. This is just listening to like a scatterbrained person talk about things that could have happened in the game. They probably did though. Anyway, they cast a 3rd Spy when I had like 15 or 12 cards in my deck, and I had a counterspell, and I legitimately had to count all of my lands in my deck and my graveyard to be like, can I let this resolve? Because it could kill me theoretically, but I had like 3 more lands in my deck, so it wasn't a big deal, because I was on the cusp of killing them within a turn or 2, so I let it resolve. They did mill another 5 cards, but it wasn't quite enough. Eventually, I think I got them down to like 6 blockers. I had many attackers. It did take 2 attacks to get in, kill them. I lost some ninjas along the way and things like that. But in the end, we ended up getting the game and the match, making it so we were going 3-0 into the next round. Round 4 was a bit special because we actually were the feature match for coverage that happened on the New York City Magic Twitch channel. And if you are interested in seeing that match be played, there will be a link in the description to it. I highly suggest you watch the entire coverage of Paupergenesis, but particularly match number 4, because you get to see me play a little bit. So if you want to see what I did to make the commentators say this,
I'm really surprised by that.
Yeah,
I'm very
I'm
surprised
sort of
by
generally
that.
confused by how Jason's playing right now.
then go ahead and watch that match. I will be going through it and I will have spoilers, so make sure to watch that first, and I guess then come correct me about what I misremembered about the game, because I'm going to summarize it and definitely get some things wrong. First off, my opponent was a fan, which was great to meet him, nice guy, and also was a mad lad who submitted a 61 card deck. A bit of a special here. on Meeting of Minds Familiars. This is a tough matchup. It's always difficult for me to play against Familiars pretty much no matter what deck I'm playing, but we're both control decks, so it's definitely going to be a slow, grindy match, but I am the proactive control deck. I'm the one who's going to want to get in for damage, and I'm going to need to end the game. I always say with Fairies, you're pretty much happy to go into the late game and have a game go as late as possible. That's not quite true against Familiars. They will win if it goes forever because of their life gain, their draw engine's a little more powerful and such, but we have removal on our side. My game plan for this match is mostly keep them off Sunscape Familiars. That's how their deck really operates. It's the name of the deck. It's very strong. The problem is that I don't necessarily have enough removal to kill all of them and kill all the other creatures that are really scary like Muldrifters and Murmuring Mystics. They started pretty slow, playing like basic Chancery, etc. And we're trying to be a little bit proactive. The big thing is I'm trying to make sure I hit land drops, so of course I'm cycling Lorians the moment that I get them, things like that. I also want to apply a little bit of pressure, so I flash in a Spellstutter Sprite early on turn 2, not countering anything because he just plays a Chancery and passes. In fact, discards a Snap to hand size. I played the Spellstutter because I had a second one in hand, and I was hoping to draw some ninjas. I didn't have any yet, but that would be a really good way to make sure we are advancing our board state and getting more cards in hand. I am sitting on a Thorn of the Black Rose that I'm hoping to be able to slam on turn 4 or 5 if able. I gotta watch out for counter spells, because while he doesn't have a ton, he will be playing Prohibit as we see here, which with 4 mana up could counter the Thorn. And I need to be a little careful because he can like snap Thorn and also, make some birds and stuff like that, but I'm chipping in with the Spellstutter. He does land a Godfarer's Faithful, which I choose not to counter because Spellstutter in hand can now counter a 2-drop. He goes for a Sunscape Familiar, and I do go for the Spellstutter, hoping that it's going to resolve. But I have a backup counter if I really need. Unless he has 2 counters, it's probably going to be able to. And the Sunscape Familiar does, in fact, go to the graveyard. On coverage, you can actually see me. I brainstorm the Thorn and the Gurmag Angler, which I draw back on top. Gurmag's pretty bad in this matchup, so I don't really want it because it can get snapped, and I can't redelve and stuff like that. I then preordain both of those cards to the bottom and immediately draw another Thorn of the Black Rose. I'm stuck on 4 mana, and I really want to be able to have at least 1 more mana up for like a Dispel or something. So I'm chipping in with 2 Spellstutters, which is barely making a dent because this Godfarer's Faithful is gaining life the whole way. Finally, I play the second Thorn of the Black Rose, which I draw. Having drawn another land, I have 1 mana up, so I'm bluffing a Dispel. I actually don't have it, but I do have a Snuff Out, which I draw, which makes it so that if they tap out for like a Muldrift or Ephemerate or something like that, I can at least interrupt that. Instead, they go for a Sunscape Familiar, which I could kill immediately, but they also cast a Murmuring Mystic, so now I have to figure out which one of them to go for. And then in the same turn, I still just have the Snuff Out available. He goes for a Snap. For just 1 mana, about to untap 2 Azorius Chanceries, making a bird for his Mystic, gaining him a life, snapping the Thorn of the Black Rose. And so I absolutely have to use my Snuff Out here on the Murmuring Mystic. Birds are already a nightmare for Fairies, but let alone the fact that I have the Monarch, I cannot let him get more birds than just the one he's making here, which does mean I have to leave Familiar around. It's definitely necessary though. He untaps his Chanceries, plays an Archaeomancer, brings back a Meeting of Minds to draw additional cards, but ends up passing the turn. He goes for the Meeting of Minds on the end step, and I decide to counterspell it. He's only got 3 cards in hand, so I'm hoping that I can run him out of cards, which is really the only way to win the game. He tries to Prohibit, but I have the 3rd Spellstutter. He gains a little bit of life. I have enough blockers to retain the Monarch, and he does not get his card draw through, so he's only on 2 cards, draws another one. Unfortunately, this was actually on my end step, which means I tapped out on my own turn, and that was probably a mistake. He ends up casting a Muldrifter, which I can't interact with, and has a Ghostly Flicker to flicker a Narcomancer and the Muldrifter. And this is where I lose the game, I believe. I got greedy fighting over the Meeting of Minds, trying to keep him off cards, and then he resolved a much better card, a card that says draw 2, plus it's a 2/2, and it can get flickered like Muldrifter, and I simply shouldn't have done that. With the Sunscape Familiar, he's able to Ghostly Flicker for just 2 mana. He Ghostly Flickers it with the Anarchomancer and the Muldrifter 2 times total, so he draws 4 cards, and the Anarchomancer keeps bringing back the Ghostly Flicker. He goes from 2 cards up to 7, and that's, like I said, pretty much where I lose. He goes for an Ephemerate on the Anarchomancer. I have a Snuff Out. He then tries to snap it. I have a Dispel, and then he still has that Ghostly Flicker, which I knew about, so I knew that I was pretty much dead here. And I pretty much just scoop it up. He has way too many cards now, and I just used all my interaction to do basically nothing. We're also 15 minutes-ish into the match, and I know if I have any chance of winning this match, it's going to be a long one. So I try not to take too much time, and I concede. Going to game 2 here, we get to bring in the Relics of Progenitus, the Okiba Shinobi. Relics, of course, are great against an Archomancer. Really just makes it hard for them to do anything in the late game with it, being able to blow up all of their cards and even exile spells along the way. And Okiba Shinobi, if it connects, is just really, really potent, especially since they don't have a ton of hard removal. We cut Suffocating Fumes and I believe 2 Augurs of Bolas, because the fact that they are blockers or even attackers is all pretty irrelevant when they're going to have a lot of walls to block us. The first several turns here, we both are just playing lands and cantrips. To hit our lands, I do get a Relic of Progenitus to start exiling things in their yard and threaten an activation anytime they Anarchomancer. And then I leave up mana for a Spellstutter Sprite, and he casts a Preordain. That's when the commentators say that I'm definitely going to spell stutter this Preordain because it's just free value. Why would I not? And then I also have ninjas in hand and I can start ninjaing with the spell stutter sprite. That does make some sense. However, he had 2 additional mana up from his Azorius Chancery, and I could just smell that this Preordain was bait. If my spell stutter sprite got countered by a Prohibit, I had nothing going for me. I'm looking at my hand on coverage here. I had 2 ninjas of the deep hours, a cast down, and a spell stutter sprite. If that spell stutter gets countered, I am losing the game because my ninjas, if I'm going to hard cast them, way too much mana, they could get countered or snapped, and they can just get blocked by like a Seagate Oracle, which he does end up casting here. So my spell stutter sprite's number 1 priority here is not to counter a spell, but to get a ninja in. And so when he preordains, I pass on it, and then he doesn't cast anything else. I also don't want to flash in that spell stutter because he could still just prohibit it. So I just let that go. This happens 2 turns in a row where he then preordains again. I let it go. But he casts this Seagate Oracle, tapping down to 1 mana, which means I know he doesn't have Snap or especially Prohibit. So I flash in my Spell Stutter. I'm able to attack with my Fairy and swap it for a Ninja, get in for 2 damage, draw a card. I have a cast down for the Seagate Oracle to push through if I need to. I will say the other thing about this is that Preordain is a free card that I can get with Spell Stutter Sprite, but it's not really a card that does much for him. Sets up his draws a little bit, but unless he's particularly hurting on something, I don't think countering it does that much. I'm not saying I would never do it. Absolutely I would, but that's why I was playing around it. So he preordains again after the Seagate Oracle. I don't counter it, and then he goes for a Godfarer's Faithful, and that's a creature that's about to block my Ninja as well as the Seagate Oracle. I don't have 2 kill spells to get through them both, so then I go for the Spell Stutter Sprite. He could still Prohibit here, but it's getting later, so him tapping out on his turn is not really where he wants to be, and I still have the 1 Ninja, so I'm no longer so reliant on the Spell Stutter resolving that it's not the end of the world for me if it does get countered. That said, he lets it resolve, so I untap. I draw a Snuff Out, so I snuff out the Seagate Oracle. I have 4 mana here. He goes for a Meeting of Minds in response, which is a good play to make sure he gets that off, but that does mean he's tapped out, so I go for an attack. I ninjutsu my 2nd Ninja, Spell Stutter Sprite back in hand. Now I'm hitting for 4, drawing 2 cards a turn. Things are feeling pretty good, but he casts a Stonehorn Dignitary from the sideboard. I have 2 mana available, so I do go for a counter spell, but that Prohibit he's been holding onto this whole time, he's able to cast, stop the counter spell. Dignitary skips my next combat, which means my ninjas are just dead in the water. I don't want to have to deal with him potentially having flicker spells for the Dignitary. If I lose more combats, I'm going to be in trouble, so I just cast it down on my main phase, knowing that he won't be able to, flicker it now. I cast a Fairy Seer, setting up my Spell Stutter to be a little bit better, setting up my draws, and he casts another Stonehorn Dignitary. I don't have a counterspell this time, so that's going to eat my combat yet again. I do draw a Murmuring Mystic, though, so I figure, well, I can start making birds, and eventually when I get a combat, I could actually attack for some damage, so we do that. Unfortunately, he does get a Muldrifter, which he evokes, and then Ghostly Flickers, both it and the Dignitary, and I don't have any removal at this point. I'm pretty low on cards. He blanks my combat yet again, draws 4 with the Muldrifter, and this is where I'm feeling like, just like last game, I'm probably going to be out of this game. Luckily for me, it seems like he doesn't necessarily draw that well. He starts hard casting Lorien Revealed, even after drawing 4 cards from Muldrifter, which is not a bad card to cast, but it means that he doesn't have anything to do with his current mana. This gives me time to resolve Throne of the Black Rose and take the Monarch, so suddenly I'm keeping up card advantage a little bit better with him. This is a point where I'm not exactly sure if I made the right call. He goes for a Sunscape Familiar. I'm trying to keep those off the field as much as possible. He has a Murmuring Mystic as well as I do, which means if his spells are reduced, I'm going to be in some big trouble. I have a counterspell and a Spell Stutter Sprite, which would counter it, but I only have 3 mana available, so I can only cast 1 of them. If I go for the Spell Stutter Sprite and he has a snap or a kill spell or anything like that, I won't be able to counter it, so I go for the hard counterspell on the Sunscape Familiar, but obviously this means all I have left in hand is a Spell Stutter Sprite that can only counter a 2-drop, rather than a hard counterspell. He uses a Mortuary Mire to put the Familiar back on top. I've already killed the Stonehorn Dignitary at this point. They're both in the graveyard, and I have a Relic, so I know that they shouldn't be coming back, and I'm not expecting a 3rd one, although I wasn't really expecting the 2nd one. He goes to cast a Godfarer's Faithful and accidentally shows a 2nd Murmuring Mystic, which is just about the most terrifying thing you can see. He corrects it, casts the Faithful, and then casts the Mystic, so he suddenly now has 2 Murmuring Mystics to my 1, and this is when I'm so confident I've lost the game. However, I ask him a question, which is the classic, how many cards are in your hand? Because I think it's like 7 still, and he says 3. And I'm looking at my board state, and I'm looking at 5 Birds, Mystic, Fairy Seer, Ninja, Spell Stutter Thorn, 2 Augurs of Bolas. This is a huge board stall. Again, I encourage you to watch the video. And he just has 2 Faithfuls, 2 mystics, and a couple of birds. And this is when I realize I need to start attacking. So I go for a pretty mild attack of 2 ninjas of the deep hours and a thorn of the black rose. And he makes a pretty moderate block. He's got a bunch of birds he could throw in front of the thorn or the ninjas, but he blocks a mystic on a ninja and a God-fearers faithful on another ninja, which is exactly what I'm hoping. We deal some damage. He takes 1 off thorn. I drew an agony warp, which is now able to kill that second murmuring mystic, which has taken 2 damage. So I'm able to clear that from the board before he's able to make additional birds. The following turn, with a mystic down, he goes for a meeting of minds on his own turn, tapping 2 God-fearers faithfuls and his murmuring mystic, which all have really high toughness and are very good blockers. So he leaves himself pretty vulnerable. He's been making some very good plays, but his taps here I think were a little suspect. Now all he has to block are 3 birds and a mole drifter, and this makes my attacks way better. Suddenly I'm attacking with 2 augurs, 2 ninjas, a thorn, and like 6 birds. He decides to chump the ninja, double block the other ninja, block an augur and takes like 8 damage. And he's still at above 20, so this is not that much damage, but he goes to like 16 or something. We keep trading counter spells and things. He's making some birds, but I'm making quite a bit more, especially because he's now double blocking my ninjas, which I'm not saying is a bad idea. It's good to get the ninjas off the field, but if he could just be blocking them with God-fearers faithfuls and then using the birds on birds, I would have not anywhere near as many birds as I did. At the end, I think I have like 12 birds that attack in, and he's down to like 3. I will say we don't quite get to lethal because he realizes he is going to lose at this point and scoops it up. With 5 minutes left on clock, we go to game 3. Neither one of our decks is going to be capable of winning in that time. Theoretically, we could play fast enough to the point where he could get a very fast early infinite combo to make infinite life or infinite attackers, but that would have to be by turn 3 so that he could attack on turn 5 if we go to turns. The commentators are very certain that there's no way I'll win that game. I do think there's a possibility I could have won it if I had the right draw. If I had like seer into ninja, into seer, into ninja, and then a bunch of removal, I could win that game for sure. We didn't keep a hand that could do that, and so I am still playing to win, but it's pretty obvious I'm probably not going to be able to get there. I keep a Relic of Progenitus, a bunch of spell stutters and counter spells just to slow him down enough. Clearly, we're going to go for the draw. We end up doing just that, playing it out to the bitter end, but neither one of us is able to make anything happen. Now, that overview was a lot more detailed than my other ones because I actually had coverage to refer to. I'll go back to now to very loosely remembering what happened for an entire match. So round 5, we go up against Black-Green Turbo Fog. My opponent was actually in the 1K the day before and made top 8, which was great for them. And so I had actually seen them playing the deck yesterday, which meant I knew what they were on. And I will say, I think this is a very favored matchup for fairies. Control decks often lose to fog decks because they don't do anything proactive, but we're a control deck that has a very proactive game plan in the right situation. So as long as I can get some ninjas down, and then I can use all of my counter spells to counter all of the fogs, we'll be okay. In addition to that, Monarch is absolutely fantastic in this matchup, and I'm pretty sure I'm able to slam Thorn immediately on turn 4, drawing 2 cards every single turn, seeing quite a few counter spells, spell stutters, and just regular counter spells. I get some augurs down, I get some fairy seers, ninjas. The thing about fog is that it doesn't care how much damage you're dealing. As long as it's not lethal, they probably will not be casting a fog spell. But with ninjas, I can only deal 2 damage a turn, and I'm still very happy with that exchange because I draw a card. But they don't want to spend a fog on my 2 damage, so it's a very hard spot for them to be in, which makes it really helpful for us to take advantage of it. But I also get an early Murmuring Mystic down, and then a Gurmag Angler. I have Monarch, Mystic, Angler all going, Mystic making more birds, and I have like 3 or 4 counter spells in hand, so I just start attacking. I think I hit them down to 6 before, of course, they're casting some fogs. They go for a fog. I show 1 counter spell. They've been drawing a lot of cards, and so they don't even have mana for more than 1 fog. I show them a counter spell, and we go to game 2 pretty quickly. And then game 2, I think they mulligan maybe once. Of course, we get to side out all of our snuff outs, Agony Warp, Suffocating Fumes, bring in anything that's somewhat helpful. Okiba Gang Shinobi, I bring in Campfire because I assume their plan is to mill us. I bring in Relics of Progenitus to hit their graveyard, and also Annul to hit any random spell that they have. We do actually get to annul a Heaped Harvest on turn 3, which is really good because the way that they could beat us is by having more mana than us, so being able to counter that is great. We're pretty much trading 1 for 1. I dispel a Fanatical Offering. They do resolve another Fanatical Offering when I'm then tapped out, but I'm once again able to get a Ninja of the Deep Hours down pretty early, start drawing some extra cards. I spell stutter a Campfire, which is really nice. I will say I forgot to mention that game 1 they started with 2 Campfires, so they were gaining a little bit of life throughout that, survived an extra attack or two, but with the angler and stuff, there was no way they were going to survive fully. And then game 2, I'm able to Okiba Gang Shinobi with my Spell Stutter Sprite. I also have a Fairy Seer on board, and I think I have 3 more mana, so I have that Spell Stutter to cast as well as a Dispel. So in response, they cast a Fanatical Offering. They have 1 card left in hand, and Offering's going to bring them to 3, but I decide I don't really care if they have 3 cards and discard down to 1, so I just let that happen. And then out of those 3 cards, they try to cast a Tangle. So I Spell Stutter that, and then they have to discard their last 2 cards with the Okiba Gang Shinobi, which I think is like a Campfire and another Offering or something. Some decent cards that would be pretty nice for them to have, but I'm able to untap again, hit them again with the Okiba. I think they cast Weather the Storm as their draw for just 3 life because they're going to have to discard it anyway. And now that I've untapped with Okiba and I have like 2 or 3 counter spells, the game's pretty much over pretty quickly, and we take that one down. Round 6, we were against Wall's Combo. First couple turns, I thought it was probably Wall's Spy, because that's a little bit more prevalent, and the only cards we saw were Generous Scent, Saga Wildling, Forests. But once we saw actual Axebane Guardian, maybe even before that when there was like a 4th Forest on the field, I realized that it was not in fact Spy. It's going to play out pretty similarly in that we are trying to reduce their mana, keep their key defenders killed, and leave up counterspells for relevant cards, but obviously we don't have to care about the graveyard, which is a bit different, except for the fact that they have a Reaping the Graves. It doesn't come up as much as Spy, obviously. Actually, before this match, I was talking to a guy that I met who was saying that his buddy was on Wall's Combo and couldn't find a 4th lead the Stampede, so instead they just threw a Hawkeye's Bow in the list. That's kind of a funny one of, plus they do have a lot of tappers, so you can put it on a creature, tap, deal a damage, move it to another one, and theoretically that could get you some damage and win you the game. It was a bit goofy, but surprisingly relevant, seeing as it gives reach, and I am on fairies. Game 1 starts off really strong for us. I'm able to counter or kill pretty much all of the relevant creatures, Overgrown Battlement, Axebane Guardian, while developing out a Spell Stutter Sprite and attacking, getting a Ninja in, although with a wall that they have, probably a Wall of Roots. No, there's no Wall of Roots here. A Caretaker or a Shield Wall Sentinel, something like that. They're able to block the Ninja so it doesn't get in over and over. But we're able to get in for a little bit of damage. And then we get to the point, probably about turn 6, where I have a choice. And this is always a really tough choice for me, which is that I have a Lorien Revealed in hand, 6 mana, so I can hard cast it. But I also have a counterspell, in this case a Spell Stutter Sprite. Now it's often best to leave up a counterspell because you're a control deck, you don't want your opponent to have free reign of everything. But with 6 mana, I'm giving up 4 mana even if I do use my counterspell, 6 if I don't. And I'm going to want to hard cast that Lorien Revealed at some point. Should I wait a turn to do it? In which case maybe I can hold up that Spell Stutter Sprite if I get another land or even find another counterspell or something. Or should I just slam the Lorien now and just hope for the best? Well, I decided to go for the Lorien Revealed, and as you can probably guess at this point, it didn't turn out great. And I would definitely call this a mistake that I made. Their board was not very impressive. I'm remembering now a little more details. They had the Tuk Tuk Rebel Fort, so all their creatures had haste. They had 1 Ceruli Caretaker, and they had a Secret Door. So they were just slowly paying 5 mana to venture into the dungeon, 1 at a time. I think it's the Lost Mines of Fandalver, the big one. And that's all they were doing. So they were really not making any progress. I did not need to be hasty and slam this Lorien Revealed, and I did anyway. I'd already played my land for the turn, so there was no way I could even draw a land and then be able to hold up the Spell Stutter, so that didn't happen. Well, their top deck for the turn, or maybe a card they were sandbagging, but I don't remember them having any cards in hand, was Winding Way, which found Overgrown Battlement, Beast Rider Vanguard, and Nyxborn Hydra. Probably couldn't have been a better 4 cards for them to find. Well, except I guess for like Axebane Guardian and Galvanic Alchemist, because the Tuk Tuk Rebel Fort gave haste, meaning they could just play both battlements, tap them for like 12 mana, immediately play a Beast Rider Vanguard and a Nyxborn Hydra on it for like 8 or 10 counters or something. I think I'm thinking their mana, I think actually they activated Vanguard once, because I think they put the Hydra on it only for like 4 counters. So they activated Vanguard and found something off of it as well. And all of this I could have prevented with my Spell Stutter Sprite because I had a Fairy Seer on board. Easily could have countered a 2-drop and wouldn't have had a problem. There was more to the game. I was able to cast down the Vanguard before they were able to activate it anymore, but they had a Hydra that was still able to attack in a few times. Plus they found an Axebane Guardian. They just had enough mana to activate the Secret Door 3 times every turn, just going through the dungeon fairly and naturally. And eventually they were able to get to the last part where they draw 3 cards and cast a spell for free. They had an Axebane Guardian, Secret Door on board. They drew and cast a Galvanic Alchemist, and we didn't have a Snuff Out or any kill spell or counter spell, and we just lost. The Lorien Revealed, I think, drew us like a land, a Brainstorm, and something else. It wasn't worth it at all. It was a major misplay, something I need to remember to not do in the future. Even playing a control deck, sometimes my urges to not draw out the game too long and to try to finish things and be hasty gets the better of me. Game 2, we get the pressure on quick. They start with an Elvish Mystic and then a Spore Frog. from the sideboard, which definitely surprised me. Obviously, it can blank all the ninjas for a turn, but they're a walls deck, so they should already be able to blank the ninjas most of the time, except for when they're first being ninjutsu'd. Seemed like a weird one to bring in, but maybe they had some cards they thought were bad and wanted to take out, and it was the best thing to do. In any case, they had just those 2 Elvish Mystic and Spore Frog down. I believe I countered/killed 3 Overgrown Battlements in a row. We had a Fairy Seer into Spell Stutter counter 1, Spell Stutter counter 1, and then Snuff Out, something like that. We also ninja'd the Spell Stutter pretty quickly, so maybe that's even where the second Spell Stutter came from. And they were just taking it for a couple of turns, so I was hitting for about 3 damage, drawing cards, solidifying us into a pretty good spot. They did cast, I think, the 3rd Battlement, and I cast a Spell Stutter Sprite to counter it, knowing that it might be bait for a Winding Way, which in fact it was. Another thing that I probably should get a little bit better at. On turn 2, I wanted to counter an Overgrown Battlement because why wouldn't you? It's a very good card. And on turn 4, I wanted to counter it because why wouldn't you? It's a very good card. I knew that there was a possibility of the Winding Way, but I probably should have been okay with the Battlement resolving at that point and just making sure that the card draw did not resolve. It's been a while since I played against Walls combo because it's not been in the meta for a while, but these are also just things I should probably remember from Elves and Spy as well. So definitely didn't play perfectly in this match. In any case, we're able to just keep killing their creatures. I think that at some point they even hard cast a Generous Ent. I'm able to snuff it out, hard cast. But the 3 or 4 damage we're able to be dealing them reliably starts to add up. They do sack the Spore Frog at one point. I believe they're at about 7 life. I hit for 4. I think they block 1 creature, something like that. They're down to 3, but they still have the food from the Generous Ent. They place some more blockers on the ground, so I believe I have a couple Augurs of Bolas that are no longer able to attack, but I have 2 Spell Stutter Sprites and a Fairy Seer in there at 3 life with a food token, so I attack with all 3. I will say my opponent says, okay, I guess I'm taking 3, looks at their life total, and I say, well, that's lethal. And they say, okay, well, let's sack a food token in response then. It would absolutely have been my right to call a judge. They said they were taking 3, and I could have won that game that way. I didn't really want to. I wouldn't want my opponent to call a judge in that case if that were me, though again, it absolutely would have been my right to. So I let him take it back, get the 3 life from the food, go back down to 3 after taking 3 damage. I figured I should probably be able to get there next turn. Ideally, as long as he just didn't gain reach creatures, I would be totally fine. I think he had like a Quirion Ranger, Cerulean Caretaker, and a Shield Wall Sentinel, and then he cast a Nyxborn Hydra enchanting the Sentinel, and played that Hawkeye's Bow, which became relevant, and equipped it to, I believe, another Cerulean Caretaker. However, to get the mana for all of that, he did have to tap his Quirion Ranger, his Caretaker initially, so he only had 2 blockers left. No, he would have had a 3rd, so he had the 3 blockers, say another Caretaker. So like a Caretaker with a bow, and a Shield Wall Sentinel with a Hydra. That's 3 blockers. I had 5 attackers because I had those 3 fairies plus 2 Augurs of Bolas, which meant I only needed to kill 1 creature to be able to attack in for lethal. Because I don't think he quite did his calculations to block properly, he ended up tapping a Caretaker and another creature to be able to equip the bow, which didn't actually give an additional blocker. It only gave an additional reach blocker. But since he tapped down to only having 3 creatures available, and I have 5, as long as I can kill 1 of them, I can get in for 3 damage. I top deck a cast down, and I cast on the Caretaker with the bow. I will say we were very much up against the clock. Obviously, this was game 2, and I was down a game. We only had about 10 minutes left on the clock, so we were both playing a little bit fast. He did have a couple turns where he was playing pretty slow, and I did have to prompt him a little bit to like, you got to make a decision here. I didn't say that like, I don't want to call a judge on you for slow play, but we were getting to the point of a minute plus without a single game action, and we were running up against the clock, which in this case was an advantage for him. So anyway, I cast down the Caretaker with a bow. He says, GG's, you got me. I immediately scoop up my cards, trying to go to shuffle to the next game, and he realizes he made a mistake. He had a Quirion Ranger, which means he could have untapped another blocker, which means he could have had 3 blockers. I didn't have any more removal spells. He said he had the combo in hand after the match, which is quite unfortunate, but he did give the signal that he had conceded. I scooped up my cards because I was trying to go to the next game, so we did end up going to the 3rd game. Dimir Fairies, as always, is a slow control deck, but it is one that can apply pressure. We had about 8 minutes left at this point to get the last game in. Luckily, I was able to get a hand that was pretty much exactly what I want. Some fairies and some ninjas, as well as some Augurs of Bolas, which don't apply a lot of pressure, but they do just enough. I was able to Spell Stutter and snuff out a lot of his early threats, start getting in with ninjas, attacking, dealing a little bit of damage here and there. I built up quite a big board. I think I had like 3 fairies, 2 ninjas, 3 Augurs on the field, something like that. Just attacking as quickly as I can. I drew one of the Arms of Hadars, which I sided in, wiped away his Orochi Leafcaller and his Quirion Ranger, which left him with only 4 mana on board, I think. He had Winding Wade, and I knew that his whole hand was like Generous Ent and Hydra or something. Expensive cards that he couldn't really use, maybe some off-color cards that he couldn't cast at that point because the leaf color died. We also gathered a crowd, as you do when you're in the last few minutes of a match, even before time was called, but I was able to get there with just lots of 1-power creatures, dealing a lot of damage altogether. So that was round 6, giving me a 5-0-1 record. Going into round 7, this is generally when the undefeated players start intentionally drawing. We knew that 18 points or 6 wins was going to get you into top 16. There were 3 6-0s, so to my side, 2 6-0s went against each other and intentionally drew. Unfortunately, I could not intentionally draw because 5-0-3 would not be a record that would get me into top 16. I'm realizing now that 5-0-3 would have been 18 points, so maybe it could have gotten there, but it would have been extremely risky, and even my opponent knew that I wasn't going to want to draw and was just going to want to play. So I played against Golgari Gardens round 7. Game 1 was a really nice back and forth of us countering spelling and spell stuttering some of his early card draw and removal, which he was also using constantly on our spell stutters, ninjas, things like that. Just a lot of solid back and forth. He was chumping ninja once or twice with Colony Gardens. Can't remember a lot of what happened for most of the game. I do know he tried to Crypt Rats at one point, and I definitely countered that. This is a game that a couple of my one-ofs really showed off what they could do. I got a Gurmag Angler. It was probably like turn 7 or 8. It was late-ish, but it was a 1-mana Angler with like a Fairy and an Augur on board, and he was at 14 life or so. He had 2 Colony Garden plants, so a couple turns to chump block the Gurmag Angler, which I obviously didn't want to happen. So I cast Suffocating Fumes to wipe simply his 2 plants. He had a Defile for the Gurmag Angler, but I had a Spell Stutter Sprite to counter that. In response to that, he used a Fanatical Offering, sacrificing one of his plants, but passed otherwise. So I was able to keep the Gurmag alive and get in for 7 damage, dealing him a lot more than he was anticipating since he thought he would be able to chump block for a few turns. He clearly wasn't drawing what he needed. I think he had like Snuff Out and maybe some Tithing Blades in hand that were not going to kill the Gurmag Angler, which was what was dealing the real damage. He cast Spinning Darkness to kill my Augur Bolas, exiling 3 black cards from his yard, and I was able to make the very sweet play of snuffing out my own Augur to make it so that he did not gain that life. I knew that I wasn't going to need a Snuff Out in this matchup because maybe he would have 1 creature I could snuff out, like an Avenging Hunter, and also I didn't need the life because I was at 20 and I was on the aggressive side. So snuffing out my own Augur to deny him 3 life. He had Lembas on board, but unfortunately he'd already dropped to like 2 life, so Gurmag plus a couple fairies was going to be lethal, and I was able to take that first game. Game 2, he kept a hand that was heavily sideboarded. I think we both mulliganed to 6, but he duressed me on turn 1. Luckily for me, I had just bottomed the only spell in my hand. I believe my hand was 2 islands, 2 spell stutters, and a ninja, maybe an Augur Bolas. And I think I bottomed like a cast down that I had kept in. Of course, for sideboarding, I took out all the snuff outs, fumes. We put in relics, annuls, a Cuba Gang Shinobi. So the duress didn't hit anything, which was very good for me, but it did give him very good information to know to play around spell stutter, which is why on turn 2, instead of leaving up spell stutter like I might, I just slammed the Augur Bolas. I think I grabbed a Brainstorm, and I'd also drawn a second ninja, so suddenly I have 2 ninjas, 2 spell stutter sprites. He duresses me again, takes that Brainstorm, sees the second ninja. I swing with the Augur, go for a ninjutsu, and then he defiles the ninja, and then is when the Rancid Earths come into play. He blows up one of my lands with Rancid Earth. I'm definitely misremembering exactly how this went. Maybe he did that on turn 3, so I went from 2 lands down to 1, but I had another one. I will say he duressed me, and I'm remembering now the land he saw, one of them was a Dimir Aqueduct. So I was just praying and hoping that I could get enough lands to not have to play it for as long as possible in case he drew another Rancid Earth. Luckily, I top decked a Lorien, so I cycled that instead of playing the Aqueduct. Played that. He did, in fact, cast a second Rancid Earth to blow up another land, which was keeping me off black for a little while. After 2 lands destroyed, and I think I had 2 more islands on board, I had to play the Aqueduct, hoping it wouldn't get blown up, and luckily it did not. I had this ninja on board, and I think 3 lands, one of which is Aqueduct, and a couple of lands. He was now at 6 mana. At this point, he knew 4 of the 6 cards in my hand, the 2 spell stutters, another ninja, I think an island, and I had 2 unknowns. So he tapped out for a Troll of Khazad Doom, hoping that it would be able to block the ninja while also being able to start pressuring me. Unfortunately, one of the 2 cards I had drawn was a cast down, and the other one was a Lorien revealed. So on the end step, I cast down his guy and cycled my Lorien to hit my 4th land drop. Attacked with the ninja, hit for 2, suddenly holding up double spell stutter sprite. He cast Wellspring, draw a card, Wellspring, draw a card. Desperately looking for like a Fanatical Offering, which could really get him back in the game. I think there was one turn where I was tapped out where with the Wellsprings he could have gone for an offering and I wouldn't have had a fodder for it and I wouldn't have had a spell stutter for it, but he didn't get there. I definitely got a little lucky there and he scooped up maybe a little prematurely, but I was very much in control of the game and so I understood it. I'm sure he was a little frustrated getting the pair down, forced to play a match that he would have preferred to just ID, especially since he was 6-1. 6-2 still should have locked him for top 8, so he might have been able to ID next round or even lose next round and still get there, but I understand being a little frustrated at the end there. He did say he was a fan and was a very nice guy, if maybe a little bit frustrated. But in any case, that made us 6-0-1 going into round 8. As soon as pairings were announced, we were at table 1, and our opponent asked, "Do you want to draw?" I said, "Yep, let's do it. Let's get some food and whatnot." He said, "Pleasure doing business with you," and we both headed off. So that meant that our record for Swiss was 6-0-2, which was in fact the highest seat in the tournament after Swiss. I never imagined that I'd be able to get first place in the Swiss, which is pretty cool. The reason partially, I was really confused how that was because I got a draw earlier in the day, which generally should mean your tiebreakers are worse and there are other people with 6-0-2 records, but realized because I got that, I had to play one more match than the other 6-0-2s here who drew intentionally in the last 2 rounds, meaning I had an additional game win that they did not, which might have placed me higher. It's also just possible that it's because my opponent's match win percentage was higher, meaning I faced more opponents who then went on to do well. But this was incredibly nice to see, and I was really happy for it. So I had close to an hour to just kind of go do whatever. I went back to the hotel room, chilled for a bit, did a bit of a vlog, and then ordered some food at the hotel restaurant, figuring I should eat something. Didn't end up eating anything because they lost my order, which was a bit of a pain. But in any case, the great thing is that it did give me the time to miss the top 16 picture that they took. Great picture. Definitely 16 people in this picture, but don't worry. I made sure to work my magic. I said, made the mistake of trying to grab food after the Swiss, missed the top 16 picture at Paupergenesis. It's okay though, because my Photoshop skills are legendary, and you can't even tell I wasn't really there. So I mean, try to spot the difference between these 2 pictures. Pretty much impossible anyway. I'm so seamlessly integrated. By the way, we had a pretty stacked top 16 here. Obviously just a ton of really good players, but you also might recognize a few. Bosch and Roll, Brian Koval right here, Paige Smith of the Pauper format panel. Also probably lesser known for their face, but this fellow right here is GN42, who's a very big online Familiars player. So definitely some recognizable names in the top 16 here that were all in the picture when it was taken. So that's great. So we made it to top 16 at the first ever Paupergenesis. And let's take a look at the deck lists here. We had a pretty good spread here. It's nice that, 8 of these aren't mono red madness. To be honest, not a single one of these was mono red madness, which is pretty cool. We had 2 blue-white familiars. I was actually on the most popular deck in the top 16, which was 3 Dimir Fae. We had a Dimir Terror, Elves, Gardens, Grixis Affinity, Gruul Tokens, a sweet list we'll look at in a bit, Jeskai Ephemerate, Jund Wildfire, Mardu Synth, Red Rally, and 2 Spy combo. Obviously a few duplicates in Spy, Fams, and Fae, but this is still 12 different decks in the top 16, which is an absolutely fantastic spread. So now let's look at our 1/8 finals match. We went up against the one Grixis Affinity pilot. I've been telling all of my friends we're doing well throughout the tournament because we've dodged Grixis Affinity. It's not an unwinnable matchup for Dimir Fae, but it is not favorable by any means. Blue-black are the worst colors at dealing with artifacts. Their spells are so cheap that it's hard to counterspell one of them and not have them just flood the board with a bunch of others. They have flyers, and Spell Stutter Sprite's not able to counter any of the affinity spells, meaning half their spells are off limits pretty much all the time, despite the amount of mana they're spending on them. So a lot of downsides here, so I knew it was going to be a tough uphill match. We actually had another match that was on coverage, but I believe it was the backup match, and our match ended, I believe, earlier than the other match, so I don't think there was actually any coverage of our match, but theoretically it's recorded and it's out there. This was also open deck lists, so we were able to see exactly what lists were here, so I actually did know what they were running. In fact, knowing that they were on one Kenku Artificer was good to know. Gave me a little bit of a heads up there. I didn't need to worry about the sideboard until game 2, and we'd be able to look at the deck lists again in between. But yeah, the Kenku and the 2 Cryogens instead of Wellsprings was the main thing that I noted down. Otherwise, pretty standard list here. Game 1, we got to start where we had like an Augur of Bolas, then we ninjutsu'd it for a little bit of damage, a card draw, and then replayed the Augur, replayed another Augur. Meanwhile, they assembled a Myr Enforcer, Refurb, and a Neutron Monitor. They were attacking for a little bit in the air, but then the breaking point was where they played a Krark Clan Shaman. I didn't have a single kill spell or anything, so they sacked 3 artifacts, wiped all of our board. Usually we have a lot of flyers and stuff, so it's not that big of a deal to see a Shaman, but I also didn't have an Agony Warp or a Suffocating Fumes or anything to take advantage of the fact that the Myr Enforcer had 3 damage on it, so they were able to attack for 9. The next turn they attacked for 9 again, and I think I was able to Spell Stutter to block the Refurb, but they already had a Blood Fountain, so they bought the Refurb back right away, and so I was pretty much dead there because of the Shaman. That's not always that problematic, but I didn't have a counter spell for this time. So game 2, we were able to look at the deck lists again. I knew they'd obviously be bringing in 4 Red Blasts. That was pretty much it. Maybe a Negate, but really the blasts were what I was counting on. We, of course, brought in our 3 annuls. I brought in 2 hydroblasts of my own, knowing that munitions is a huge problem for us. Galvanic blast is annoying, and obviously they're pyroblasts. I took out, I think, 2 augers, 2 snuffouts, and a fumes. There's nothing in our deck that's all terrible, but like snuffout doesn't kill refurb, and I don't really love paying the life for it in this match. Augur doesn't really attack in very well because they have mirror enforcers and monitors for cheap. And they don't chump block very well either because they have flyers or just enormous creatures. I guess they chump block okay. They don't block very well. So anyway, I mulliganed to 6, I think, and they mulliganed to 5. So it was a very low resource game, and that kind of worked out well for us because my hand was 2 lands, Fairy Seer, and like a null counterspell cast down. So I basically played a Fairy Seer, scryed, set up, I think, more interaction, and proceeded to just 1-for-1 them over and over and over. Their deck is set up to 2-for-1 every time. So if you can just 1-for-1 all of their 2-for-1s, that's kind of how you slow them down enough. Because I always say that I'm happy to go to the very late game with Dimir Fae. That is true. The problem is the mid game with Grixis Affinity is usually too explosive to get to the late game. So I was nulling their Wellsprings, spell settering their Blood Fountains, countering monitors and refurbs. I was doing my best to only cast down their creatures when they were tapped out, but I did at one point cast down their monitor when their last card in hand was a Reckoner's Bargain, which meant they went up by 5 life, undoing my literally 5 attacks with Fairy Seer. But I eventually finally found a ninja that was able to start drawing us cards, replay the Seer. Suddenly I had those 2 going. We were both top decking, but we were top decking 2 cards a turn. We got some counter spells, so when they did draw spells, we were able to counter them, and they did flood out a little bit. So we were able to get that game that was looking a little bit rough. Game 3, I honestly think that I probably should have mulliganed more as well. I think it was another hand that was just kind of generically okay. I think I had 1 Spell Stutter Sprite, but really I should have gone for that second game hand again. Tried my luck at finding 2 to 3 counterspells between annuls, counterspell, spell stutter, and dispel. I maybe could have gotten there, and we really need to slow them down in the early game, otherwise we're not going to be able to win this one. The problem did come when they cast a Kenku Artificer, which I'm remembering now they did get in game 2 as well, and I was able to counterspell, didn't care about it, but this one they were able to get and resolve. Now I had left in Agony Warp because I knew they had the Kenku, but unfortunately I didn't see it. We started taking 3 every single turn from it. I think we'd already taken 8 from a Mirror Enforcer before I was able to kill that. To be honest, it was very late. I don't think I was playing perfectly. At one point I attacked with an Augur of Bolas that should have been left back to block the Kenku Artificer, and then they were able to attack with it, but I was pretty much dead at this point. They cast like a Blood Fountain with 1 card left in hand. I tried to spell stutter it because I needed any advantage I could get, and their last card, of course, was a Galvanic Blast when I was at 2. I knew it was possible they could have a Galvanic Blast, and I could have held the spell stutter for it, but the Blood Fountain was about to do too much work for them anyway, that if it resolved, I was going to lose the game regardless. So it didn't really matter. Unfortunately, that brought us to the end of our run, losing in the top 16, making my final record 6-1-2, which is not bad at all. I did end up 9th place overall since I was the highest player who then got knocked out in this top 16. I was able to be the first of those. 9th place. I was also pretty close to having the fewest games lost. With 5, I was tied with Kyle, and only Gavin and Will had fewer games lost than us. Going into the top 16, I had only lost 3 games all day, which was 1 to Panza, 1 to Walls, and 1 to Familiars. A very nice record for me, but let's get to the top 16. So going from 16th place down to 1st place, we had Zori's Familiars. One interesting thing being that they were playing Lonely Arroyo, which is one of the pain lands from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. This is an infinite outlet. If you're able to do your combo to like snap and Ghostly Flicker to get infinite mana, then you can Ghostly Flicker the Arroyo and an Archaeomancer over and over to kill your opponent. This is a way to kill your opponent faster, specifically 1 turn faster than like infinite birds from a Muldrifter, which could be relevant if you're in turns in a game or just to get the game done pretty quickly. Jeskai Ephemerate is 15th here on 4 Bender's Waterskin. Definitely a card we've been seeing more in the meta online, but a full playset is quite a few. Also, I like the little toolbox here of a bunch of one-ofs. Union, Torch, Ride's End, Ethereal Haze, Dispel, Brainstorm. Brainstorm being a one-of, little interesting. Also a Goliath Paladin in the main, not something you see every day. We had Spy combo. This is actually the Spy player that I played against earlier and defeated. Writhing Chrysalis and Fang Dragon in the board for a bit of a transformative sideboard. Also a Gorilla, new Marvel card that allows you to destroy an artifact or enchantment that's not a creature at sorcery speed. We had a Mardu Synthesizer list, running a Compass, Tithing Blade, and Mukutai Ambusher main. That's where the Ambushers went from my list, as well as some interesting one-ofs in the sideboard. Cleric, Cast Down, only 1 Dust to Dust. Dimir Fairies, not my list here, but by Frozen Brain. On much more of the Barf list with Mukutai, 4 Fairy Seers, No mystics, except for the sideboard. Interesting stuff there. But they are still on the Aqueduct, which I appreciate. Another Golgari Spy combo. I apologize. This is the opponent that I played against. I don't know who this is. This is someone else. The one I played against here, a little more standard, not with the Chrysalis sideboard. But a Rebel Butt Maverick in the main deck, a little bit interesting. And here is that Gruul tokens list that I promised you. A similar list that we've seen sometimes online before, but not one that you necessarily expect to do so well at a big tournament here. We got Nest Invader, Repurposer, Chrysalis, of course, Malevolent Rumble, Bolts, Glimpse the Impossible, all of these making creatures so that Molten Gatekeeper and Impact Tremors can deal a bunch of damage. Also playing one of Raphael, which is an Impact Tremors on a stick, similar to the Gatekeeper. A Makeshift Munitions, Sprout Swarm, of course, Hissing Iguanar, 2 call damage control to buy back a lot of these cards, and Essence Warden to gain a bunch of life off of your own guys. A really sweet list. Glad to see it do so well here. And also taking a Brew, less of a meta deck, wasn't enough. They're also on the 61 card special with an extra forest there. Then we have Dimir Fairies by Marsh Flats. I don't really like this picture. Oh, there we go. Perfect. We've talked about this list a lot. I think you're familiar with it. Finally, we have our last Dimir Fairies pilot. This was, in fact, Bosch and Roll. He was on the Mukatai Ambusher and the Moon Circuit Hacker with 2 Ninjas of the Deep Hours. The only thing that I'm jealous of is that he had the guts to put Okiba Gang Shinobi in the main deck, a big player in the deck, which I almost wish I had done as well. Sideboard pretty standard. And this is the start of our top 8. Our third Dimir Fairies player being kicked out here. Then we had Paige Smith on Mono Green Elves. I was able to witness Paige playing against an Elves mirror to my left in round 2 or 3, I think. And I just casually heard tap Priest for 11, untap, Priest for 11, untap, Priest for 11, Hydra for 34, and that was pretty funny. Nothing specifically unique about this list. Pulse of Marasa is something I haven't seen a ton, otherwise pretty standard, but very well done to be able to pilot it to a top 8 at a huge tournament like this. We have Golgari Gardens, the Gardens player that I played against, who has those Rancid Earths in the sideboard, and also an Accursed Marauder in the main deck, which I didn't mention before. Pretty sweet. Mono Red Rally here with a Fire Blast and the Festivities in the main deck, as well as 2 Chain Lightnings, 3 Rens Resolve, 3 Synth, and otherwise a bunch of play sets. Also playing a couple Mind Collapse in the sideboard, where you can sacrifice a mountain to pay its mana cost, deal 5 damage to a creature, so a nice way to take out a terror if you really need to. Then we get to our top 4. Grixis Affinity, the pilot who knocked me out. You'll know this list already. Then Jund Wildfire taking 3rd place here on 2 Gixian Infiltrators, but also a Nyxborn Hydra and a Sagu Wildling. Definitely a little interesting. The Hydra is kind of older tech from when the deck was first built. People have gone away from. I'm still a big Nyxborn Hydra fan, so I don't mind it at all. 7 basics in this list, as opposed to the usual 6 with a Vault of Whispers, or an extra vault, that is. And also only 20 lands. I got to dock them points for that. 21 lands is the correct number that you should be playing. Then we have our top 2, which was Azorius Familiars versus Dimir Terror. I was able to watch this match. It was extremely exciting. Lots of fun stuff going on. But 2nd place was, in fact, Azorius Familiars. This is, again, GN42 online, playing the modern age version of Familiars with a couple deep analysis. Snow-covered islands, but not plains. Very interesting there. 2 Ephemerates, 1 Ghostly Flicker. A sideboard of only 1 Stonehorn Dignitary. See, that's what I was thinking my opponent would be doing before. Otherwise looks relatively standard, but obviously piloted it to an incredible 2nd place finish. And that does mean that Christopher Jacobs with not Walls combo, but Dimir Terror was the winner of the inaugural Paupergenesis, with a pretty standard list here, I think. 10 threats with your Snackers, Tolarian Terrors, and 2 Anglers. 4 Snuff Outs, a Cast Down, a Fangs, a Fumes, and a Deep Analysis. A couple Ponders and Spell Pierce. 4 Thought Scour and Mental Note. Playsets of Counterspell, Brainstorm, and Lorien. 6 Dual Lands, and 10 Plains. Sideboard, a Thorn of the Black Rose, maybe a little bit interesting there. Envelop, but otherwise just a solid deck all around that did some work. And that was the first ever Paupergenesis. It was absolutely incredible to get to go. I've started going to more competitive tournaments over the last year or so. I've been doing the Win-A-Duels, 1Ks that I can find, but definitely get a little overwhelmed with giant weekend-long events that I need to drive for an entire day to get to. But this was such a memorable experience that I absolutely am glad I didn't miss it. I was able to meet tons of fans, which I absolutely loved. I was also able to connect with some other creators, which was really sweet. Like the Common Ground folks, Kali Kais, I was able to talk with Paige for a little while. Was able to meet Chris for the first time in person, which was great. I joined her for commentary on a tournament that they were running, I think, last year. So it was just great to actually meet a bunch of people in person. Oh, I literally almost forgot. I'll go to the secret wider shot for this. that I was able to snag a Paupergenesis playmat, which you might think, oh, that's cool, but you know, why is that such a big deal? Well, I, not being someone who goes to big events like this, never plans things out properly, always forgets about things. For example, I forgot to sign up for Paupergenesis until it was capped. It was pretty sad I was not going to get to go, and then they luckily added 30 more tickets. And then it was capped again before I was able to get a ticket. And then they opened it yet again, and thank God they did, because that was when I was actually able to finally get one, because I'm terrible at planning. I didn't realize there was a playmat that I would desperately want to have, so it was not on my radar until I started to notice that a whole bunch of people had one, and so I went up to the judge's booth and asked, are there any playmats I can get? And they said, well, we technically sold out, but we do have 2 left. They're the ones that are on coverage, though. So you're going to have to wait until the end of the entire event to get one. And I said, okay. That's fine. I'm here anyway, and I'm already going to be watching the finals. So as soon as the finals were concluded, oh, congratulations. All right. Booked it to the judge's booth, pleaded with them to get me one of the mats that I could buy. And after a few judges had to run around making sure it was okay to let one go, I was able to snag it. And my God, if it isn't the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. So that was just a fun little story that I wanted to let you all in on. Thanks so much to everybody who watches the channel. Again, everybody who showed up to Paupergenesis and greeted me. We also just hit 15,000 subscribers on the channel. Just feeling a lot of love. I really appreciate it. All of it makes daily life a whole lot better. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, and I'll see you all next time. And of course, thank you so much to my supporters, including my $10 and up monthly supporters, like Howard Granger, Halkaz, DJ Vinyl, Paladillin C, Blackjack Davey, Max, and someone you know, PK. It means more than anything to me. I will see you all next time.